Right now, we continue to follow that breaking news out of DTW, where a plane full of passengers was denied entry to the U.S. and forced to land in Montreal until a person could be removed from the plane over Ebola concerns. A lot of unanswered questions tonight, including how is a close call like this even possible? Joining us now to hopefully shed some light on this, aviation expert Evan Brode. And it's so good to see you. Thanks for joining us here tonight on our 10 o'clock news, Evan.
Good to see you, too. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about this for a moment, because we know that there's travel restrictions with South Sudan, Uganda, and Congo. And so these three countries, there's an Ebola outbreak happening in that part of the world. And so there's a 21-day travel restriction. So this person, the CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, admits should not have been on the plane. You'd obviously agree with that based on the rules.
100%. So before every flight, in order to check in on an international flight, you do have to submit your passport information. And so when you submit your passport information to the airline, it doesn't just get stored to the airline itself, but it gets sent to the Customs and Border Patrol through a system called APIS, which is the Advanced Passenger Information System. And APIS is kind of like a database where they can look at all passenger information that's going on that flight, where they're coming from, where they're from, and what they're doing, how long they were at where they were coming from, and how quickly they're coming back, right? So it gives the airline, it gives the United States government an idea of kind of who's coming into the country. Now, what should have happened is they should have said, okay, this person was in one of these three countries within the last 21 days. They can't come on board. But somehow there was a misstep. We don't know exactly how, but somehow there was a misstep and they were allowed on board.
Evan, for a moment, you study this stuff. You fly planes, not commercial planes, but you fly planes. You study how all of this stuff works. When you look at this situation, is it somebody, would you guess, and again, we can't just surmise what exactly happened here, but is it someone who looks at the passport and says, wait a minute, it says Congo here from the origination. Maybe we should, not let you through. Somehow that person missed it? Is that what we're looking at, is simply human error?
I would more imagine it as an error in terms of the system itself. I think, obviously the flight attendant's the boarding agent's going to look at the passport when you do board, verify where you're coming from. Now, obviously that boarding agent didn't realize where that person was coming from or didn't realize any information about that and was allowed on board. Now, there's an electronic system, which I mentioned, the APIS, that then takes a look at that and kind of gives the United States rundown of who's coming in. Somehow along that process, there was an error, and unfortunately we don't know, but there was an error along that process, and they were allowed to get on that flight, and that flight did take off.
It's interesting because obviously something happened while those folks were in the air to alert them that this person from Congo was on that flight, and then suddenly there was a change of plans. Talk for a moment about rerouting. Obviously, they picked Montreal as they were heading towards Detroit. Does that make sense to you from from kind of looking at this from literally a 30,000-foot view?
It absolutely makes sense. And that's a great question. It's kind of a complicated question, but it's a great question. Now, they're already over Canada. They're on their way to Detroit, and they realized for some reason, they realized that there's someone on board that should not be on board. So what would you maybe do? Go back to where you came from. Go back to France. They were allowed there. Let's go back to France. Now, the issue is they're already so far along their flight that they've already run through most of their fuel that they've planned on board. And so they can no longer turn around, but they can't continue to the United States because the United States says, hey, you can't come in. So the nearest option is Montreal, and they divert to Montreal. Now, we do know that they were in Montreal for just over an hour, and they parked at a remote stand, which basically means it wasn't at a normal terminal gate. The doors opened, gates or stairs came up to the aircraft. Someone possibly was let off, and they continued on their way to Detroit.
Well, and we know the person was let off from the back of the plane, and I know there was a lot of masked agents, and there were also people who were on the plane who worked for the airline who were wearing masks, and I think one of the passengers asked the crew, hey, can I have a mask as well? And they said, we don't have one for you. And the guy told me, Mike Reed, the passenger, it makes me want to pack a mask on a flight because you never know what you're going to run into. It's kind of a sad situation in terms of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Dr. Kumar says, who was just on board or just on the news, he said that, it's not an airborne virus. It's only sent via bodily fluids. Now, let's pretend that wasn't the case. Let's pretend that somehow Ebola could have gone through the air. It's important to understand that the aircraft systems, the environmental systems on the aircraft are incredibly well designed. So not only is it constantly being sent in and out of the aircraft, but remember this air has to be pressurized to make it breathable for people that high up in the atmosphere. And so this air is constantly being sent in, and used air is constantly being sent out. So if there was a trace of some disease on board, it's likely that it was immediately sent overboard and it didn't stay inside the cabin for very long.
And Evan Brode, we thank you for your perspective here tonight. The good news here is the fact that Ebola is not something that is airborne. Instead, it is through bodily fluids. And so, again, we also can note tonight that the person who was on the flight from Congo, we do not know if the person had Ebola per se. Simply, they came from a country in which there's a restriction because of an outbreak. But nonetheless, we thank you for your time and your perspective here tonight on the news. Thanks, Evan.